What's up, everybody? Andrew Mahone here with Darium's Competitive Pokemon, here reviewing Tord Reklev's European International Championship winning list. So congratulations to Tord. This is an insane list, and that's an insane accomplishment. Not only just winning the European International Championships, but winning back-to-back International Championships. How crazy is that? He just won the North American International Championships in July, and then came out and won this European International Championships just this past weekend. So shout out to Tord. Amazing accomplishment, amazing deck. He is really showing that consistency is king with his deck building. I mean, he does a lot of innovative things with his deck building that a lot of players aren't doing. You could see in his North American International Championship winning list, he had played 4 copies of Tapu Lele. That's something nobody else was doing at that time. And he just showed how much power that gave his deck and his decision making, being able to get exactly what he wanted out of his deck at any given point in time. Now he's been playing 4 copies of Zoroark GX, something that no other player was really thinking about heading up to this tournament. Also playing 3 copies of Bridget, Puzzle of Time, just having the option to get whatever he wants out of his deck, every turn, is so good. And I really love the way this deck works. I really love the way Tord had built it. He's really asserting himself as one of the top players in the world right now with that huge of an accomplishment, something that's never been done before. Back-to-back wins at an international championship. I mean, just wow. I'm very excited to get to showing off Tord's list, so let's go ahead and take a look. It does start with 4 copies of Zoroark GX, 1 copy of the Breakthrough Zoroark, and 4 copies of Zorua. This is the newest one with that Ram attack, just because you can't attack with the other one since we don't play any copies of Darkness Energy. We also play 2 copies of Golisopod GX, 3 copies of Windpod. You can see a much thinner Golisopod line than you might have thought, a very thin Golisopod line. This is primarily a Zoroark GX deck. He does also play 1 copy of this Mewtwo from Evolutions, 1 copy of Mr. Mime, 1 copy of Tapu Koko, and 3 copies of Tapu Lele. So a very interesting cast of Pokemon. It actually played a game against Tord without knowing it on PTCGO. He whooped me with this deck, and I should have known that, he had been putting a lot of thought into this thing. I mean, this deck really shines. I mean, and let's start off with the 4 copies of Zoroark GX. Zoroark GX is the main attacker in this deck. Also, your main draw power trade, having access to 4 trades potentially. I saw Tord would very often have like 3 of these things set up. The option to just trade, 3 times a turn is totally insane. You could totally just mill through your entire deck, just get access to all the resources you need to just pick out whatever you want on your opponent's field and knock it out with a very efficient Righteous Beating attack. Righteous Beating is not the world's most powerful attack. If you have 6 Pokemon in play, that's a base 120 damage. He only plays 2 copies of Choice Band, so most of the time, you're just going to be swinging for 120. However, a turn 2 120, put wherever you want on your opponent's side of the field. Since he does play 4 copies of Guzma, he's probably going to be having access to those very early. He is going to be able to take whatever knockouts he wants on your side of the field beginning on turn 2. So this thing is going to be busting out 120 damage early, and then he has the option to move into other Pokemon as well. He can continue to put on pressure with Golisopod GX's first impression. He can also go in with stand-in Zoroark's Mind Jack for big one-hit knockouts, surprise one-hit knockouts in the middle of the game. Mind Jack can just do a ton of damage if your opponent has their bench filled. So I do love the inclusion of the Mind Jack Zoroark as well. Also great for just forcing odd prizes. Maybe if your opponent has taken, just nothing but 2 GX knockouts, you can force the odd prize with the Zoroark Mind Jack and just take some surprise numbers, since it does get bigger numbers than Zoroark GX and Golisopod GX. Now, obviously, Crossing Cut GX does do a good amount, but Zoroark GX is your heaviest hitter. Not Zoroark GX, the Zoroark Breakthrough is your heaviest hitter in this deck with that Mind Jack. So I do love the inclusion of that. I have been going to bat for this Mind Jack Zoroark, and I'm glad to see it included here. But Zoroark GX really shining in this deck, and Tord just showing how consistent this card is and how versatile it is, when combined with something like Puzzle of Time, which he also plays in this list. Now, this is a 2-hit KO deck. Most of the time, you're just going to be doing 120 here, 120 there, but then since we do have these two Stage 1 Pokemon, very consistent, 210 hit points each, a lot of times they will take hits, and then Tord does play Acerola to go ahead and heal them, lift them up, continue just to set them down, evolve them, so on and so forth. So just a very consistent deck. Easily pumps out damage. I mean, just one energy attacks all around. Everybody in this deck attacks for one energy attachment, and how awesome is that? I mean, with all these Zoroark GX, you're pretty much never going to be missing a DCE either. I mean, he's really got everything thought out here. You could tell he worked on this list for a very long time. So shout out to Tord. This thing is great. He also plays 3 copies of Wimpod and 1 copy of Golisopod GX. Wimpod is a great starter since you could just wimp out into this Tapu Koko and then just pivot to whoever you would want to attack with from there. So I do like the 3 copies of Wimpod. I also like that it's just a very thin Golisopod GX line. This is primarily a Zoroark GX deck. Golisopod is just here to, obviously you get grass type coverage, so that's great. You're going to be doing much better against Greninja decks thanks to Golisopod GX here with that first impression, but it also just gives you some other options. I do like that it's primarily a Zoroark GX deck though, because sometimes Golisopod GX can get stuck if you don't have access to Guzma, if you don't have access to Acerola, sometimes it can get stuck. Also makes you much more weak to fire decks. This Zoroark GX deck can easily just start going in on a fire deck, very aggressively. Zoroark with the stand-in, very good against fire decks as well, and this deck would apply a lot of pressure to a fire deck without having fire weak Golisopod GX in play. So very cool, split of Pokemon here. I really love the synergy. DCE works with Zoroark GX. DCE also works with Golisopod GX to help unlock that armor press and crossing cut GX attacks as well. To help protect against sniping Pokemon, he does play a copy of Mr. Mime, protecting against the opponent's Tapu Kokos, Latioses. Also improves your Decidueye matchup a little bit, just because Decidueye can be rough. If they go ahead and they are just spreading damage, all these Pokemon are pretty weak. I mean, the Zorua is very weak, Wimpod very weak. So, with all your Pokemon, really having lower hit point evolutions underneath of them, Mr. Mime is definitely a clutch inclusion to make sure that you are not just getting devolved all the time. So I do like the inclusion of that. Tapu Koko, great as a pivot Pokemon. Love it in conjunction with Golisopod GX. Also just great as a Guzma target. So if you do have a Zoroark GX in the active position, as long as Tapu Koko is on the bench, you could Guzma, promote the Tapu Koko, and then pivot, retreat into whoever you would like to perform an attack. So I love it for that. Also, Flying Flip can just do very well to soften up your opponent's Pokemon if you do find yourself a little short on some knockouts with Righteous Beating or First Impression. Flying Flip can be very good just to soften some Pokemon up so that you can go ahead and clean them up with your other attackers. Now, this is a crazy inclusion. The Mewtwo from Evolutions, this card was not seeing a lot of play. It did see a little bit of play back when Mewtwo was popular. It did see a little bit of play, at the national championships as well to help deal with Espeon. But this thing has not been seeing play lately, and it is a cool addition, though. I do like it. 130 hit points is just great for a basic Pokemon. Psychic is an awesome attack that just really punishes opponents who load up lots of energy onto their Pokemon. So what's cool about Psychic is that you can even use this against a lot of different decks. You could use it against Volcanion as a non-EX attacker, right? Zoroark, very good as a non-EX attacker. The Breakthrough one, this very good against a non-EX attacker against Volcanion as well, since they tend to load up a lot of energies onto their Pokemon. If you're going for a 2-hit KO, Psychic with 3 energy attached, you could do a little 80 damage here, which in combination with 120 from a Zoroark GX is going to be enough for a knockout. So it just gets you that little bit of damage in a pinch if you need it. Also, very good against a Gardevoir GX that happens to have gotten carried away with itself. So if your opponent is loading up a Gardevoir GX, it's got a ton of energy on it, so what? How many energy do they need to knock out a Zoroark GX with the DCs? 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. And they can't just do 21 because of the... they can do 21. Yep. So 21. So they need 7, they need 5 energy on it. So that means you're going to be doing 120 damage with Mewtwo against a Gardevoir GX that does have 5 energy on it. So 120 damage, not bad considering you're going to be doing, 120 damage with something like a Golisopod. You're going to be doing, you don't do 120, you could do 100 damage with the Zoroark. So if you have a choice band, you can help clean things up with this Mewtwo. So that is pretty cool and just very good for helping to take care of those Gardevoir GXs if they have too much energy on them. So that's pretty cool. I like that it's low maintenance. I like that you could just slap a DCE on the thing and get it going. So that is pretty neat. Also good if you happen to be playing against anything like an Espeon, if you happen to be playing against Buzzwole, right? If Buzzwole just is getting way too trigger happy, has 3 energies on a Buzzwole, you could do what, 2, 4, 6, 8. You could do 160 damage. If you have a choice band, you could put the choice band on here. You're doing 110 base, 220 damage to a Buzzwole GX. So this Mewtwo is good for punishing Buzzwole GX that happens to have 3 energy on it too, since a loaded up Buzzwole GX can be pretty devastating for this deck, since you're going to be knocking out Zoroarks and Golisopods pretty easily with the 3 energy Buzzwole. So Mewtwo there helps keep Buzzwole in check as well, so I do like it in this list. We also have our 3 copies of Tapu Lele GX. Tapu Lele GX, awesome in the deck. Energy Drive, is an option since we do rely on DCE to attack, but also Wonder Tag, just being able to hand select whatever supporter you like out of the deck can be very good here, especially since we do play 1 copy of Mallow. Mallow, really cool in combination with Trade. Going to be talking about that momentarily here, but I do love the Pokemon cast that Tord has just decided to play in this list. I think it's really well-rounded, really cool, and I expect this deck to do great things in the weeks to come. The supporters are really crazy in this deck. He only plays 2 copies of Professor Sycamore, 4 copies of N, 3 copies of Bridget, 4 copies of Guzma, 3 copies of Acerola, and 1 Mallow. So this is awesome. Only 2 copies of Professor Sycamore. He does not need them. If he needs to draw cards, he could usually just trade for them. So he does not need to burn more resources with Professor Sycamore. That being said, sometimes Sycamore is just the best option. It's good to play 2 copies in here. He could get them back from the discard pile with Puzzle of Time, so it's no sweat if he does run out of them early. He still can have access to them with Puzzle of Time. 4 copies of N. Awesome in here. Conserves your puzzles of time. You don't want to play Professor Sycamore all the time because you don't want to be discarding your puzzles. You want to get full usage out of them. N helps you conserve your puzzles. If you only have 1 puzzle in your hand, you can end it back in. No sweat. Also helps just nerf your opponent's options at the end of the game after they've taken some prizes. And it's just, pretty much the best supporter in format. And is just very good. Limits your opponent, helps you set up, conserves your puzzles. Love N. Going to be playing 4 copies, just your best draw card in the deck in combination with Trade. Now 3 copies of Bridget. This is innovative and this is very new. This is very cool because this is a Zoroark GX deck. So Zoroark GX, all it wants to do is get a bunch of Zoruas out on the first turn, then start evolving into them on the second turn so that you can start trading, find your DCEs, and start taking knockouts. So that is very cool. 3 Bridget really helps you get that. With 3 Bridget, 4 Ultra Ball, and 3 copies of Tapu Lele, that's what, 6? You have 10 outs to a turn 1 Bridget. I mean, that is awesome. I did my math, right? 3, 3, and 4. Yep. 10 outs to a turn 1 Bridget. You're going to be getting the turn 1 Bridget all the time. This is great. So I do love 3 copies of Bridget in here, but a lot of decks can't really afford to play 3 copies of Bridget since it is a dead card later in the game. Zoroark GX does not have this problem since Trade is just always looking for dead cards to discard. So if you do find yourself with a Bridget later in the game, don't need it, just trade it away to draw 2 more cards. So I do love the synergy there between Bridget and Trade. You set up with it early and then you trade it away later in the game. Just ditch it to the discard and continue drawing more cards. 4 copies of Guzma is essential in this deck because this deck wants to be aggressive early. You want to be taking out pointed threats. You want to be taking out exactly what you want to on your opponent's side of the field to nerf their options so they cannot build up a big Pokemon to take out your Zoroarks, right? Because Zoroark does not do a lot of damage himself. So you need to be able to take out your opponent's Pokemon with precision. 4 copies of Guzma helps you do that. With trade, you're always going to be finding the Guzma. Finding the Guzma DCE combo really allows you to just pinpoint exactly what you want on your opponent's side of the field. Also, another thing about Bridget, Zoroark GX does more damage for the amount of bench Pokemon that you have in play. So sometimes you might find yourself just wanting to Bridget for 1 Pokemon just to make sure that you're doing the maximum amount of damage with Zoroark GX later in the game. We do play 3 copies of Acerola. I mentioned earlier that you might take hits with Golisopod, you might take hits with Zoroark GX, and then you could just go ahead and lift them up with Acerola. They only are 1 energy attackers, so you bring the energy up with you, slap down something else, and just go in attacking with something new. Love Acerola in here for picking up those Pokemon, conserving your energy. Just Acerola so good, but I do agree that Guzma is more important. Acerola 3 of is great. You don't need Acerola early. You only need Acerola once your Pokemon starts getting damaged. So Guzma, probably going to want it as early as the 2nd turn of the game. Acerola, maybe turn 3, 4 as the game progresses on. And you can reuse these cards with Puzzle of Time, which you'll probably find yourself doing pretty often. I do love the 1 copy of Mallow in here. Search your deck for 2 cards, shuffle your deck, then put those 2 cards on top of your deck. Obviously, perfect synergy with trade. A lot of times you might find yourself using Tapu Lele for the Mallow to go ahead, throw the double colorless energy that you're looking for on top of the deck. Or you could throw 2 Puzzles of Time on top of the deck, trade, draw the 2 Puzzles of Time. Perfect Puzzle of Time play as well. Mallow does wonders in this deck, so really cool inclusion there. As far as the items go, Tord has decided to play 4 copies of Ultra Ball, obviously, to get those Pokemon set up. 4 copies of Puzzle of Time. So good in this deck. With trade, he is always going to be able to draw these. Mallow helps set these up. He is just going to be able to put these puzzle pieces together very often with the amount of draw that he has in this deck, and I love that it allows him to just reuse those resources, those valuable resources over and over again. Puzzle of Time, allowing you to reuse things like Double Colorless, allows you to reuse things like Guzma, allows you to find Pokemon like stand-in Zoroark. I mean, you just have unlimited options with the amount of draw, from the deck that he's able to get with Zoroark GX and the amount of access he has to his discard pile with Puzzle of Time. So very cool there. He also plays 4 copies of Field Blower, 2 Enhanced Hammer, and 2 Choice Band. 4 copies of Field Blower is totally insane. 4 copies of Field Blower. Why would anyone need 4 copies of Field Blower? Well, let's think about it. He really, really cannot afford to have a Parallel City in play, right? I mean, Zoroark GX gets nerfed by Parallel City very hard. 4 copies of Field Blower means you're always going to be able to bump a Parallel City very easily. So you really want to keep Parallel City out of play. Also, this deck does not pump out a lot of damage, so you really want to make sure that you keep fighting Fury Belts off of Pokemon like Volcanion. Fighting Fury Belt can be very annoying. You max out at 120 damage. So, getting 120 damage perfect twice is what it would be required to knock out something like a Turtonator with a Fighting Fury Belt on. Field Blower just helps to alleviate that pressure, so you don't need to do 120 both times. You can maybe just hit once for 100 if you have to, or something like that. So removing Fighting Fury Belts is good as well. Also, you want to remove tools from Garbodor. Garbodor does a lot against this deck. I mean, we have a lot of tools, item cards here. I mean, the Ultra Balls, the Puzzle of Times, the Field Blowers. It's not that many in the grand scheme of things. I mean, 12, 13, 14, only 16 actually. But Garbodor, the ability Garbodor, does a lot versus this deck. As far as shutting down the abilities, trade is the lifeblood of this deck. And you really want to be drawing all the cards the deck will lock up without access to trade. So Field Blower, 4 copies of Field Blower, means that Garbodor with Garbotoxin is not going to be giving you any trouble whatsoever. So I do love the consistency here for that. Also, Field Blower is excellent for keeping those Choice Bands off of Gardevoir GX. You really want to keep Choice Band off of Gardevoir GX so that it does not attain that one-hit knockout even easier against your Pokemon. You really want to make them stretch for those one-hit knockouts, so Field Blower can help bump those Choice Bands as well. Do like the two copies of Choice Band, 2 copies of Enhanced Hammer. Enhanced Hammer also great against Gardevoir GX, bumping those double colorless energies. Also great in the mirror, bumping double colorless energies. Double colorless energy is a very good card in this format, and Enhanced Hammer just really helps you pump the brakes on what your opponent is doing, slow them down, and make sure that you are still in control of the game early on until you can just overrun your opponent with pressure. And then 2 copies of Choice Band, to boost your own damage output. Sometimes you just need a little extra to get those perfect knockouts, especially with the breakthrough Zoroark, with the stand-in and the Mind Jack. I mean, sometimes Choice Band can just help you get that clutch knockout with that Zoroark. Also, on a Golisopod GX, being able to crossing cut GX for 180 is also very good. So there are some applications for Choice Band, but you can see it is not as essential in this deck since this is a 2-hit KO deck. You are going to be just trying to manipulate your opponent's board state so that you are always in control, taking pointed knockouts on your opponent's side of the field, denying them knockouts with Acerola. You are not going for big one-hit knockouts all the time on Pokemon EX and Pokemon GX, so Choice Band is not really needed all that much. 2 copies works just fine. And then with Puzzle of Time, Tord really is able to get away with a very low energy count. And you can see that we are only playing 4 copies of Double Colorless and 3 copies of Grass. And with Puzzle of Time, he can get these back very easily, so he does not need to play any more than this. He's going to be saving energy via Acerola, taking hits, scooping up his Pokemon, conserving his energy in the process with Acerola. Also, taking aggressive knockouts early. This is really all the energy you need. He doesn't need to play Special Charge or anything like that. He could just get back a Double Colorless or a Grass energy here and there with Puzzle of Time and just make sure that he keeps his energies counted. This is another reason why, Sycamore is not all that great in this deck. You can only play 2 copies of Sycamore because you don't want to be discarding your precious energy. That would be devastating. So he does want to make sure he gets a turn 1 Bridget. That's why he plays 3. Set up as many Zoroarks as he can, and then make sure he conserves his resources like energy for pointed knockouts that he's trying to take on his opponent's side of the field. So I hope I did a good job explaining this awesome deck to you guys. I am very excited about this Zoroark Golisopod deck. I think it should be very strong, and I think it's going to be very good in the weeks and months to come. So shout out to Tord for another international championship win. Thank you all for sharing your deck list with us. Thank you all for watching the video. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think about this deck in the comments below. Peace.